Good afternoon from sacred space at Titania's realm. It's 12:36 p.m. on the 13th of February 2025. Thought I'd carry on with my random readings, because I'm just going to keep reading at random, people of Earth, from Mysteries of the Unexplained. It's a very hot day today, very scathing hot, and my beautiful Rati, who cleans for me on Thursday mornings, has been and gone. And yes, we talked about the state of our world. We're living in very strange times, the times where a US president can change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America, where I read this morning an article on the massive increase in cancers in Japan, especially among the cohort of people who had seven COVID vaccines, or even 8. Why would you do that to yourself, people of Earth? Why would you even go along with any of that? Well, I didn't. I spoke out against it from the very beginning. So I have the very unusual, quirky experience of watching my entire planet go into self-immolation and destruct itself all around me, and I'm helpless to do anything about it because I'm only one person and I have my own health issues. I've literally, just like this Everclear song, got to watch the world die. And in the meantime, live each day as if there's a beautiful future ahead of us all somehow. Just not looking all that positive right now, people of Earth, given the lunatics that are in charge of entire nations right now. And the mass adverse reactions and the wars and just the gross insanity that is probably made even more grosser because they've all locked themselves off too much of this. Physiological changes and mental changes. And I sit alone without even my daughters. My friend, one of my close friends, is, I guess, depressed too, not taking calls again. My other friend's been struck down with an illness, which is a concern. I spoke to my cousin, my transgender cousin, and lives up in Cairns yesterday, because I worried about the flooding. She said Cairns hasn't been too badly affected, fortunately. But she informed me that she's quite happy to go at any time in the near future. I think she's 78. So she's long in the tooth, but still, I could hear the depression seeping through the phone. We're all tired and we're all wrung out and we're all traumatised as a species and we're all kind of done. So, and I'm holding on for my little bit of joy and delight and happiness, which is going dancing on Friday night. And now I have to live in fear of being attacked and sexually assaulted by women as well as the men now. It's all very fucking chilling and terrifying, quite frankly. And then, living this kind of isolated lifestyle that I do, watching my world die. Not sure how much longer, to be honest, I can hold on. What's, like my cousin says, what's actually the point? She says there's no food in the supermarkets in Cairns. It's dire, very dire. So, as my beautiful little Rati said, must stay positive, Tanya. You must stay positive. How can one stay positive when I've got nothing to look forward to and no one to be with me and no fucking future? How does one stay positive? Well, I'll read you stories about strange and unexplained things from other time periods in our earth, and then I'll remember, it will remind me that I've survived all of that oddness, weirdness, high strangeness, and just by willpower alone I can survive potentially even this crazy post-COVIDian epoch. The Gulf of America, people. The Gulf of fucking America. And that moron wanting to turn Gaza into a giant casino and playground only for the very wealthy, dispossessing 2 million people of their land. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. I'm a Jew and I think that's outrageous. Those poor people. Why can't you just let people live their best lives and live in peace and treat them with a modicum of fucking respect and live and let live? I mean, yeah, Hamas needs to be taken out because they're lunatics too, but why drag everyone else into that? It's appalling. Anyway, those are my dark thoughts for the day, and I'm trying to hold on to what's left of my sanity, people of Earth. Still hoping against hope by some miracle to find true love and happiness with a wonderful man who adores, values, cherishes me and chooses to be with me. And what have I got to choose from out in the world but maniacs and predators and the kinds of idiots that would vote for somebody like Donald Trump or our current Australian Prime Ministers and leaders who were quite happy to poison our entire nation and our children and our future progeny. So no, it's hopeless. It's hopeless, and I'll just carry on each day and read fucking stories and live in Titania's realm, where the weather's always lovely and people are always kind and respectful and honouring, and my real love partner is no doubt waiting for me in another dimension somewhere else, since no human man had the courage or the balls or the basic decency to be my partner in this one. It is what it is, people of Earth. And even your best friend doesn't take your calls anymore, you've got to worry. Jesus. Well, he's what's the word? Casualty of the last poisoning epoch. It's gifted him diabetes and depression. And my depression is back with a vengeance since I started on those antibiotics. It's odd. Antibiotics don't usually trigger depression in me. Makes me wonder what's in them. Just saying. I'm down to the last tablet, so hopefully I'll pick up again. And I'll probably feel better after dancing on Friday, which, 3 hours or 4 hours of exercise does me the power of good usually. It exhausts me, but it does me the power of good in other ways. Oh, here's something I always found fascinating. Let's read about that. Unearthly fates. I'm going to have to put the aircon back on. Something like the fires of hell are in here. It's an odd existence, people of Earth. But I'm not alone in it. I'm sharing it with all of you. 7 billion across this planet. We're in this together, whether we fucking like it or not. So be kind and be authentic and be loving to those who genuinely love you, and slough off the rest. Just time wasters and oxygen thieves and energy vampires. Just saying. I should have a PhD in psychic vampires by now. Could probably write a book about it. Huh. Another book that won't get written because can't be asked. That's why we have our little YouTube videos for my little rants about all my little failures, and then we throw our head back and we laugh and laugh and laugh. There'll be no one to read the books in a few years' time. If AI has its way, there'll be nothing and no one left. Dark. It's something I didn't subscribe to a year ago, listening to that maniac Yokowski who told his own children to kiss their own asses goodbye in 5 years' time. Or did I arc up about that? I said, never ever take away the quality of hope. Certainly not from your young children, you fucking monster. And where are we now? I'm starting to see that he might actually have been right after all. And I'm not happy about that, letting monsters be right. Let us continue reading stories. Life is a story, unfurling and unfolding majestically every day, every way. Jesus. If I could find one decent man, I could even maybe get laid again. But no, they come and they touch me without my permission. Hands go roaming over my nether regions without my permission. Flicking my hair without my permission. Then they wonder why I find it all repulsive. Dear Goddess. Even my friend at the last gig, I don't know what that was actually about, to be honest. Some little fucking joke he's trying to play on me. Stood behind me and said, "Hi gang," and he put his arm around my shoulder, but because his hand was facing that way, he didn't actually touch me. He was like 3 inches away from touching me. It's odd. I love you, darling, but you're a bit odd. You're a bit odd like the mama tea. It's probably why we're friends. Anyway, I just turned and I looked up at our other mutual friend from Ramjet, and I just went, even he caught the look of horror on my face. You're allowed to touch me in a respectful, honouring way, and upper arm or a hug. I'm just talking about the creeps that their fingers go wanting to invade your internal, orifices, or touch me while I'm dancing, flicking my hair. That was odd too. The whole world has fucking gone insane, people, and I'm having to somehow survive it. It's all a bit odd. Anyway, did I mention I'm going dancing on Friday? It's going to be odd. It's going to be odd because I'm just going to be hyper aware of expecting lunatics to jump out from every fucking part of my world, and it's like that now. It's like that now. I don't know who's going to come out with their weird and inappropriate behaviours that they never used to do before. They used to have a bit of fucking grace and respect. By the gods, maybe I shouldn't go dancing. It's only been 3 weeks. Maybe I should just stay the fuck home. 3 weeks since I've danced at, my favourite club. Maybe I should just stay the fuck home and just watch the world die. It's an option. But then if I do that, I'm ceding and quitting and giving in to my enemies, the maniacs that are out there that try to drive you out from your dance space where you've had a lot of joy for 17 months, Tanya Aarons. And why should I be denied my right and privilege to be happy and, do my performance art and support my bands and live my best life because of maniacs? Why should I give up? So it's a matter of principle now. I tell you what, I'll be carrying my black sock with me, and don't anyone start shit with me on Friday night. That's all I have to say about that. I'll be amped up to the power of 10. It's like, don't deserve to be treated like that by any man, woman or child. The fact that that attack came from a woman still got my brain spinning on a dime. Still can't comprehend that. It's evil is what it was. Anyway, I'm sure it won't happen again because, well, they just wouldn't dare, would they? By the gods. Anyway, let us continue reading. Unearthly fates. Like dancing with the red shoes to your own immolation like I've done for 14 years. It's been a bit unearthly, to be honest. It's been a bit astonishing and courageous and triumphant and at times beautiful. That's why there's people out there that are so envious and malicious that they would dare to try and set their fingers in places they don't belong. Ugly it was. Unearthly indeed is the fate of bursting into flame without benefit of ignition from any known source, an occurrence shared by an impressive number of unfortunates. Another manifestation of attack by agencies unknown is the rash of cattle mutilations on western ranches, the explanations for which are as strange as the events themselves. Examples of demonic possession and curses that can kill are almost too fanciful to believe, but in the minds of their victims, their power is all too real. Unearthly also are the cases of people who appear seemingly from nowhere and those who suddenly and inexplicably disappear into the unknown. Right. This is a portrait of a soul facing the fate of damnation. Just your average guy post-COVID epoch, pondering all his adverse reactions and wondering which one's going to actually kill him. Spontaneous human combustion is a well-documented phenomenon in which a human body ignites and burns without any known contact with an external source of fire. In some cases the damage is slight, in others the victim is reduced to ashes, and in some of the strangest cases nearby objects escape relatively unscathed. The chair or bed on which the victim was sitting or lying, and even the clothes on the charred body, may be undamaged or only slightly singed. Often, too, a single foot, a leg, or the tips of some fingers remain intact, although the rest of the body is consumed. It's alarming, isn't it? It's almost like someone pointed some kind of energy beam at them or some kind of laser. Something to think about. We have the technology to do that now. Back in the day, they just wouldn't have even imagined that was possible. Anyway, just my dark thoughts because I read too much. I read too much and I've watched too many paranormal shows and too many sci-fi shows, too many horror shows, which is why I want to immerse myself in passion and romance and beauty and life force and excitement with someone quite wonderful and or a wild like me who treats me like a queen. Had enough gus and horror in my day. But it's a hard habit to break, isn't it? It is, when you can see what's going on in your world all around you and you can't escape it. Your open air concentration camp with limited food in the shops, having fear peddled at us at every single moment of every single day. And even big, burly, strong men are weakened and look to me for guidance because they know I've survived more things than they've even imagined in their worst nightmares. How do you do it, Tanya Aarons? You put one foot in front of the other. You never let the bastards grind you down, and you say no, often, and with emphasis and meaning, and you hold your line. And you love. You love because you can love. You love all the beautiful things that still are also in our world. Butterflies and glistening trees and men that look at you with eyes of great admiration and wonder, even if they can't be your man because they're not available. Children who look at you like you hold the secrets of the universe and can give them a beautiful future that they truly do deserve. Yesterday, my kindness to a little wasp that was needing to get out in the world and survive out there in the real world where there's food and water and maybe other wasps. Well, you feel my vibe, don't you, darlings? Be with ones who love you and treat you with kindness and respect. And if there's no one left to do that, be with yourself. You hold the power to survive everything and everyone. Is the survival going to be worth it though? These are important questions. But I'm no lemming. I didn't go down with the last evil of 2020. So, true lovers, come and see me and let's dance. Be joyous and happy and heartfelt and pure and beauteous and defiant and triumphant. The rest of the weaklings can wallow in their own muck and mire of their own fucking creation because they willingly took that into their bodies. Quite willingly. Some were even paid to. It's insane, people are there. It's insane. Anyway. Cases of spontaneous human combustion, SHC, began to appear in medical reports as far back as the 17th century. That's the 1600s, people of Earth. It's astonishing. There weren't laser beams back then. I wonder how it happened. I used to be terrified of that happening to me, especially going through the worst of menopause too, because I could go on fire in microseconds and think I'm going to explode from the heat inside of me. I'm a passionate woman, but we're all passionate. We're all alive. We're all walking fucking hormones and pheromones and biochemistry, and some of us burn, baby. Burn. And by the 20th century, the literature abounded in detailed accounts of inexplicable human incineration. Over a span of 4 centuries, more than 200 such incidents have been reported. Isn't a great deal given it was 400 years worth of history, but still, It's not a very, I can't imagine it would be a pleasant way to die. Just imploding from inside of yourself with your own heat. It's odd, isn't it? It's very odd, people of Earth. In earlier times, the classical targets of this fiery fate were believed to be alcoholic and usually corpulent elderly women who lived alone. Well, I'm fucked then. I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm corpulent and I'm older and I live alone. See? Man on pause. They come over the worst of menopause though. Maybe. They almost always incinerated indoors on winter nights and were usually found near an open fire. Well, that could explain a lot. They simply caught fire, people of Earth. Needless to say, there were no witnesses. Their deaths were attributed to God's punishment of their sins. As if it's not bad enough that you died alone by burning to death, but you were blamed for being sinful as well. Fuck that filthy religion, that victim-blaming, gaslighting, damnable, foul religion. Just saying. But even in those days, there were exceptions, as some of the cases related in this chapter show. In fact, recent research into this strange phenomenon shows a fairly equal representation of the sexes among the victims, with ages ranging from infancy to 114 years. Imagine getting to be 114 years old and then you spontaneously combust. Just seems rude, doesn't it? It's just outrageous. Many were abstemious and thin. Some have combusted in the proximity of a source of fire, but others have ignited while they were driving or simply walking in surroundings devoid of any external source of fire. See, those are the cases that blow my mind. How did they catch fire like that? How? Like, with a fire nearby, a spark could fly over to you and light you up, but where there's no fire? What? Say what? Contemporary scientific and medical opinion rejects the idea of spontaneous combustion, dismissing the many instances of inexplicable deaths by burning as simply puzzling or unsolved. Although a number of theories have been proposed, there is no sound physiological model that can explain how a human body could possibly self-ignite, or how it could burn fiercely enough to be reduced to ashes. Indeed, you need very high temperatures for that. Such consumption of human tissue and bone is only possible at the extreme temperatures over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit provided by a pressurized crematorium. And of course, when it comes to explaining unscorched clothing or a fully fleshed limb associated with the ashy or charred remains, the inexplicable becomes the bizarre. Indeed. Indeed. Some kind of death ray from outer space, from an alien race doing it? But then why only one person at a time, spread over 400 years? It's odd. Odd, people of Earth. Well, let's read on, find out more. Before 1800, one of the earliest well-attested cases of spontaneous human combustion was recorded by Thomas Bartholin, 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 in 1673. A poor woman of the people was mysteriously consumed by fire in Paris. What do they mean by woman of the people? She had been a heavy drinker of strong spirits to the point of not taking any nourishment for 3 years. Okay, well, that's a bit odd, isn't it? Like, what the hell? How can you just drink and have no nourishment, people of Earth? One evening, she went to sleep on a straw pallet and was burned up during the night. In the morning, only her head and the ends of her fingers were found. Oh, that's just revolting. That'll fucking give me nightmares. All the rest of her, she says, tapping her fingers. Oh, dear goddess. All the rest of her body were reduced to ashes. The incident was recounted by Pierre-Aimé Lair, who in 1800 published the first comprehensive essay on the subject of human combustion, American Medicine, 9:657, April 22, 1905, Pierre-Aimé Lair, Essai sur la combustion humaine. I got there in the end, people of Earth. Pages 10 to 11. Interesting. An unusually vivid and detailed report of inexplicable human incineration was given by Claude Nicolas Lecat, a physician serving as an apprentice surgeon in Reims, France, where he stayed at a local inn. The innkeeper, Jean Millet, had a nagging wife who got drunk every day. On the night of February 19th, 1725, the inn was full of people in anticipation of a big fair the next day. Millet and his wife Nicole retired early. Madame Millet could not sleep and got up to go downstairs into the kitchen, probably to follow her usual habit of drinking herself insensible in front of a warm fire. Her husband fell asleep, but around 2 o'clock in the morning he woke up with a start. He smelled fire and rushed downstairs, banging on doors along the way to wake up any sleeping guests. When the panicked group arrived in the big kitchen, what they found burning was not the inn, but the innkeeper's wife, Madame Millet, who was lying close to the fireplace and was almost totally consumed by fire. Only part of her head, her lower limbs, and a few vertebrae remained. A small section of the flooring under the body had been burned through, and the chair she usually sat on next to the fireplace was slightly scorched, but nothing else in the room was even touched by fire. A police lieutenant, accompanied by 2 gendarmes, was on, since it's in France, lieutenant. I know, God help us. Accompanied by 2 gendarmes, was making his rounds when he heard the commotion from the inn. He quickly went inside, saw the smouldering remains, and promptly arrested Jean Millet on suspicion of murder. It was well known that Madame Millet was not only a drunkard, but a shrew who made life miserable for her hard-working husband. Well, that's not very nice, is it? There's no need for that behaviour. The suspicion around town was that Jean desperately wanted to be rid of his wife so that he could marry a servant girl who worked at the inn. The charges levelled against him were that the innkeeper had poured the remaining contents of the liqueur bottle over the body of Nicole Millet, who was presumably unconscious by then, deliberately set her on fire, and then tried to make it look like an accident. Lecat, the young physician, was among those who had rushed downstairs and seen the charred body of Madame Millet. During the court proceedings that followed, he testified on behalf of the innkeeper. He stated that he did not believe that any human agency could account for the total combustion of the unfortunate victim's body, so that only the skull and extremities remained, and in such a way as to leave nearby objects unburned. Yeah, that's the weird part. You'd think it would burn everything down around her, wouldn't you? The court proceedings were very heated, the prosecution insisting that Jean Millet was a murderer. He was declared guilty and condemned to death. However, Lecat's repeated testimony that this could not have been a normal fire, but was instead the visitation of God, finally persuaded the court. Jean Millet's sentence was reversed and he was released, but by then the poor man's life was ruined. Deeply depressed, he lived out the rest of his days in a hospital. Theodoric R. and John B. Beck, Elements of Medical Jurisprudence, 10th edition, volume 2, pages 94 to 105. Michael Harrison, Fire from Heaven, A Study of Spontaneous Combustion in Human Beings, has seen. Pierre-Aimé Lair, Essai sur la combustion humaine, pages 22 to 25, 22 or 25. Don't worry, I'm not that smart. I don't just speak fluent French. I'm just practicing. Should I ever make it to Paris before my entire planet immolates itself? I love Paris in the springtime. I love Paris in the fall. I love Paris in the summer when it sizzles, etc., etc., etc. Will I ever make it to Paris? Probably not. But I mustn't be bitter, because the cards the gods gave me, I must hold my head high, keep dreaming the psychedelic dream. Imagine as if I really am in Paris right now in this moment. The time now here in Brisbane, Australia is 1:15 p.m. and it's summer, so it's probably, 9-10 hours behind us, and it's winter, and it's probably not that lovely sitting in Paris right now at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in an outdoor cafe, sipping cafe au lait avec un cher monsieur. But it's not all about wanting men either. I could be just sitting, patting someone's beautiful little chien, because they take their little doggies out in Paris. Or I could be admiring a wonderful statue nearby, or having just gone to Le Louvre, having taken a day trip to Versailles. I could be anywhere, Paris. Outside of Paris, I mean. I could be anywhere people are there in my imagination, instead of stuck here on a dying planet and housing commission. Ooh, it's grinding my gears. Can you tell? It's grinding my gears. All the places I could be, and the wonderful, intelligent, artistic, interesting people I could be communicating with, swapping stories about their life experiences or things they've learned, or maybe poets and artists and writers. I could be with the bourgeoisie instead of trapped in this feckless, ignoble, soulless, empty hellscape. I resent that. I resent that. I really do. But I had all my money stolen from me by knaves, so it's nothing I could have done. Short of killing them all, and that wouldn't have got me money either, so. And like I say, live and let live. Let their karma be their karma. The celebrated case of the Countess di Bundy of Cesena, Italy. Could be in downtown Italy right now. It's also winter there. Had an Italian lover for a while, but he was a dead shit, another dead shit. Couldn't control himself for 5 minutes. Mad he was, quite mad, devilishly handsome. Of course, anointed as it was by the devil himself. Come to you as beings of light, remember that. Don't get me started on the ugly ones though. They can be just as devilish. I mean, you have to laugh. The celebrated case of the Contessa di Bundy of Cesena, Italy, was first described by the Reverend Joseph Bianchini of Verona in an account dated April 4, 1731, and brought to the notice of the Royal Society of London in 1745. Just under 2 months till my own 60th birthday. I'm going to have to do something really special and splendid, provided I have enough money. I won't have much money because I have to pay my car rego, my new license, which is another fucking $198. Why is everything around the $200 mark lately? It's just rude. So there's $350 gone. Bing, bang, boom, baby, like that. Which will leave me kind of broke by my birthday. However, if I can manage it, I'll take myself to North Stradbroke Island and sit on the beach, and I might even get myself stinking drunk for a change. I never get drunk before that. Never. Don't like to lose control, but I think I should be sitting somewhere lovely, sipping something delicious, and just living my best life. Deserve that. I deserve to live my best life after what we've all gone through as a species in recent years, and me in my entire life. It's not new. It's not a new hellscape for me. It's just another fucking groove. Another groove. Round and round and round we go, going nowhere. 60 years old in April. 6 decades on this planet, and I still haven't found the one. Oh, you have to laugh. My close friends are running for the hills and others are stalking me daily out of curiosity or boredom. Well, what can I say? What can anyone say? Anyway, it was described and brought in the account dated April 4, 1731, and brought to the notice of the Royal Society of London in 1745. Take courage, Tanya, the spirits just yelled in my ear. Take courage. The man for you won't play games. This is true. This is true, my angels. The Countess Cornelia de Bundy, in the 62nd year of her age, so she was 2 years older than me, was all day as well as she used to be, but at night was observed when at supper, dull and heavy. She retired, was put to bed, where she passed 3 hours or more in familiar discourses with her maid, and in some prayers. At last, falling asleep, the door was shut, so her maid waited with her till she fell asleep. I guess they did that in the old days. There wasn't television or movies or Netflix, so people kept company with each other. Actually, communicated and spent quality time together and enjoyed each other's company. Not these alienating, soulless, empty, avoidant voids of existence that we have now. Maybe the world deserves to be destroyed. It's so ugly and soulless and empty. But just look at the trees. Think of the trees. Think of the new babies being born that deserve a chance at life too. Let everyone else burn. It's a bit like that. I'm getting to that phase where I just no longer care anymore. Don't have the energy to care. In the morning, and I've fought hard for my fellow humans. I've fought very, very hard on my own quiet little hobbit stomping, tribal moshing, truth speaking ways. So you can tell when I say I no longer care that I'm done. I think the final straw, after being sexually assaulted by that filthy creature, was having my GP haggle with me for medical treatment. It's like, what? What has the world come to? Anyway. In the morning, the maid, taking notice that her mistress did not wake at the usual hour, went into the bedchamber and called her, but not being answered, doubting some ill accident, opened the window and saw the corpse of her mistress in this deplorable condition. "4 feet distance from the bed, there was a heap of ashes, 2 legs untouched, from the foot to the knee." Oh, what a horrible sight. I mean, I would scream. With their stockings on. Between them was the lady's head, whose brains, half of the back part of the skull and the whole chin were burnt to ashes, amongst which were found 3 fingers blackened. All the rest was ashes, which had this peculiar quality that they left in the hand, when taken up, a greasy and stinking moisture. What on earth could that be? Like a kind of an oil residue. The air in the room was also observed cumbered with soot floating in it. A small oil lamp on the floor was covered with ashes, but no oil in it. 2 candles and candlesticks upon a table stood upright. The cotton wick was left in both, but the tallow was gone and vanished. How can that be? That the wick remained, but the tallow had gone. What? What did that? Somewhat of moisture was about the feet of the candlesticks. The bed received no damage. The blankets and sheets were only raised on one side, as when a person rises up from it or goes in. The whole furniture as well as the bed was spread over with moist and ash-coloured soot, which had penetrated into the chest of drawers, even to foul the linens. Nay, the soot was also gone into a neighbouring kitchen, and hung on the walls, movables, by that they mean furniture, and utensils of it. From the pantry a piece of bread covered with that soot and grown black was given to several dogs, all of which refused to eat it. That's interesting. Must have given off some kind of weird scent that the dogs knew not to eat it. In the room above, it was moreover taken notice that from the lower part of the windows trickled down a greasy, loathsome, yellowish liquor, and thereabout they smelt a stink without knowing of what, and saw the soot fly around. It was remarkable that the floor of the chamber was so thick smeared with a gluish moisture that it could not be taken off, and the stink spread more and more through the other chambers. Heavens to Murgatroyd! Imagine that. It should be noted that this was an upper-class woman of good character, not a poor old creature addicted to alcohol. However, some connection with alcohol did exist. A few days after the Countess's demise, an Italian nobleman who passed through Cesena said that he had heard on good authority that the Countess was in the habit of washing her body in camphorated spirits of wine when she felt indisposed, that it was very likely she had done so on the evening before her accident. I suppose like as a form of disinfectant. After a great deal of speculation by the medical authorities of the time, the final opinion was that, although lightning could conceivably be blamed, it was more likely that a naturally caused internal combustion had taken place in her body, that she had risen from her bed to cool herself, and that on her way to open the window she had been overcome. Her body was consumed from within, and no external flames were produced that could set fire to the furniture in the room. The internal combustion was ascribed to, and we quote here, inflamed effluvia of her blood by juices and fermentations in the stomach, by the many combustible matters that are abundant in living bodies for the uses of life, and finally, by the fiery evaporations which exhale from the settlings of spirit of wine, brandies, and other hot liquors in the tunica villosa of the stomach, and other adipose or fat membranes, within which, as chemists observe, those spirits engender a kind of camphor which, in the night time, in sleep, by a full breathing and respiration, are put in a stronger motion, and consequently more apt to be set afire. That's from the American Medicine magazine, I presume, April 22, 1905, and also Gentleman's Magazine, 1746. Don Gio Maria Bertoli, an Italian priest who caught fire during his devotions, was one of the few victims to survive his ordeal for several days. Oh, that's horrific. I don't know what's worse, burning immediately to death or surviving and dying later. Awful. The case was reported by Dr. Battaglia, the surgeon who attended him, in a journal from Florence dated October 1776. The priest, who had been travelling about the country, arrived in the evening at the house of his brother-in-law and asked to be shown to his apartment. Once inside, he requested a handkerchief to be placed between his shirt and shoulders. Devout priests often wore shirts made of scratchy horsehair for penance, and the handkerchief served to relieve any discomfort and distraction during devotions. He was left alone to pray. A few minutes later, an extraordinary noise was heard from the room, with the cries of the priest ringing out in agony. The people of the house, rushing into the room, found Bertoli extended on the floor, surrounded by a light flame that receded as they approached and finally vanished. On the following morning, the patient was examined by Dr. Battaglia, who found the skin of the right arm almost entirely detached and hanging from the bone. From the shoulders to the thighs, the skin was equally injured. On the right hand, the part most seriously burned, putrefaction had already begun. Despite immediate treatment, the condition worsened. The patient complained of burning thirst and was horribly convulsed. His stool was described as full of putrid and bilious matter, and he was exhausted by continual vomiting accompanied by fever and delirium. Poor man. He died on the fourth day in a state of unconsciousness. Dr. Battaglia could not find a trace of any known disease. A horrifying aspect of the priest's condition was that, even before he died, the odour of the putrescent flesh had become insufferable. Dr. Battaglia said he saw worms crawling from the body onto the bed, and that the nails had fallen off the fingers. When the priest was first brought to Dr. Battaglia, he said that all he remembered was a stroke like the blow of a cudgel on the right hand. At the same time, he saw a lambent flame attach itself to his shirt, which was immediately reduced to ashes, although his cuffs remained untouched. The handkerchief that had been placed on his shoulders was, astonishingly, also intact. His trousers too were unharmed, but although not a hair on his head was singed, his cap was totally consumed. There had been no fire in the room. An oil lamp, however, which had been full of oil, was completely dry, and the lamp's wick was reduced to a cinder. That's from Theodoric R. and John B. Beck, Elements of Medical Jurisprudence, and the Journal of Criminal Law, Criminology and Political Science, March to April 1952. An English source from 1788 told of a man who entered a room where, to his amazement, he beheld a young chambermaid scrubbing the floor, with fire blazing from her back. He cried out in alarm, and it was only then that the girl became aware of the fire and started to scream. She was dead before he could put out the flames. Oh, that's appalling, isn't it? It's all very odd, these stories. Why am I wallowing in these odd, dark, miserable, ghoulish, horror, true stories? I don't know. I don't know. The phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion was recognised in the 19th century and may have inspired this dramatic engraving, Lady Ablaze. From 1800 to 1900. Mrs. Wright, the mother of John Wright, a London linen draper, was hospitalised for severe burns from which she was not expected to recover. Her injuries were the culmination of a series of strange spontaneous fires that had been plaguing the Wright household since January 5, 1820. On that date there was an unexplained small fire. Then on January 7, Mrs. Wright, who had been sitting with a servant girl by the kitchen hearth, noticed her own clothes were on fire as she stood up to walk away. On January 12, her clothes flamed up again in the presence of the same girl, but this time Mrs. Wright had been nowhere near the hearth. Then, sometime on the following day, Wright heard screams from the kitchen. Wright heard screams from the kitchen where his mother was and where the girl had been. He ran into the room and found his mother in flames. Only a moment before had the girl left the kitchen, and this time Wright accused her. But it was Mrs. Wright's belief that the girl had nothing to do with her misfortunes, and that something supernatural was assailing her. She sent for her daughter who arrived to guard her. He continued to believe that the girl could have nothing to do with the fires, and went to the kitchen where the girl was, and again, by some unknown means, she caught fire. She was so dreadfully burned that she was put to bed. When she had gone to sleep, her son and daughter left the room, and were immediately brought back by her screams, finding her surrounded by flames. Then the girl was told to leave the house. She left, and there were no more fires. This seemed conclusive, and the rights caused her arrest. At the hearing, the magistrate said that he had no doubt that the girl was guilty, but that he could not pronounce sentence until Mrs. Wright should so recover as to testify. The complete books of Charles Fort, pages 927 to 28. A mysterious, though not spontaneous, case of human combustion was reported by a Dr. Dubrew in the Edinburgh Medical and Surgical Journal, dated March 1827. The subject's hands burst into blue flames when he attempted to help his brother, whose clothes were on fire. The flames continued for several hours to leap up and flicker over the hands, and only constant immersion in water finally extinguished them. That's odd, isn't it? Very odd. A professor of mathematics at the University of Nashville in Tennessee was described as a victim of partial human combustion by John Overton, MD, in the Transactions of the Medical Society of Tennessee. On January 5, 1835, James Hamilton had just returned home from the university, a walk of 3/4 of a mile, and had decided to check a hygrometer hanging outside his house. It was a very cold day. The thermometer registered 8 degrees above zero. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain like a hornet's sting, together with a sensation of heat in the thigh of his left leg. When he looked down, he saw a bright flame several inches high, about the diameter of a dime and somewhat flattened at the top. He immediately slapped it with his hand, but to no avail. Hamilton kept his head and, reasoning that cutting off the oxygen supply should extinguish the flame, he cupped his hands over the spot of burning flesh. His presence of mind saved his life because, indeed, the flame went out. Dear Goddess, imagine that. The pain, however, continued, and felt as though it was coming from deep within his thigh. The professor, remaining calm throughout this ordeal, went back into the house, removed his pants and underpants, and examined the wound. The injury resembled an abrasion, about 3/4 of an inch in width and 3 inches long. The burn was livid but dry, and extended obliquely across the lower portion of his left thigh. He examined his underpants and noted that they were burned through at the point corresponding to the injury, but were not scorched in the slightest around the hole. What was Most amazing, however, was that the trousers were not burned at all. Opposite the hole in the underwear, the fibres on the inside of the pants leg were slightly tinged with a dark yellow fuzz, which the professor was able to scrape off with a penknife. It sounds like sulphur. The examining physician treated the wound as he would any ordinary burn, although it was unusual in some respects. The injury was very deep and took 32 days to heal. The muscles around the area also remained sore for a long time, and the scar was unusually livid. Dr. Overton stated that the patient had always been in excellent health and continued to be so throughout his period of recovery. Vincent H. Gaddis, Mysterious Fires and Lights, pages 265 to 66. Michael Harrison, Fire from Heaven, A Study of Spontaneous Combustion in Human Beings, page 84. Right, are we sick of reading about spontaneous combustion yet? Goes on. Quite a lot more. Quite a lot more. Are we tired, people of Earth? Are we tired? It goes all the way. Oh, carry on. I'm only 1 hour and 11 minutes, so we'll carry on because there's lots of different reports. I could change the subject though and go to another subject. We'll stick with this one. It's all a bit fascinating, quite frankly. In 1847, a French couple were, since they were a couple, were indicted for murdering the man's father and burning his body to conceal the crime. They claimed that the 71-year-old man was found in a state of combustion in his bed on January 6 of that year, according to the account given in court. The chamber was filled with dense smoke, and one of the witnesses asserted that he saw, playing around the body of the deceased, a small whitish flame, which receded from him as he approached. The clothes of the deceased and the coverings of the bed were almost entirely consumed, but the wood was only partially burnt. There were no ashes and only a small quantity of vegetable charcoal. There was, however, a kind of mixed residue altered by fire, and some pieces of animal charcoal, which had evidently been derived from the articulations. The victim's son and daughter-in-law declared that the deceased, according to his usual practice, had a hot brick placed at his feet when he went to bed the previous evening. You have to be careful with bricks. I discovered how dangerous they are when I first started soldering using normal house bricks, which is an incredibly stupid and dangerous thing to do because they can explode, people. That's why you have to buy proper bricks made for pizza ovens or buy proper soldering bricks intended for kilns. But I didn't know that at the time, and luckily when I heard the bricks starting to make weird crackling sounds, I stopped immediately and realised it was dodgy as fuck. Could have injured myself had it exploded though. The things you learn when you teach yourself silversmithing. Anyway. When they passed his door 2 hours later, They noticed nothing out of the ordinary. However, early the next morning, the victim's grandson entered his grandfather's room and found the old man burning up as described. The inquest established that the victim was not addicted to drunkenness, that he had been in the habit of carrying lucifer matches, an early type of friction match, in his waistcoat pocket. A Dr. Masson, M-A-S-S-O, pardon me, got hiccups now. A Dr. Masson, I'll go with that, who was commissioned to investigate the case, had the body exhumed and examined. A partially burned cravat was found around the neck, and part of the sleeve of his nightshirt was intact. His burnt hands were attached to the forearms only by some carbonized tendons, which gave way when touched. Oh, the horror of it. The legs were detached from the torso and looked as though they had been deliberately cut off, except for the presence of some charring around their edges. The doctor gave evidence to the effect that he thought it impossible for the victim to have died of accidental burning or as a result of having been deliberately set on fire after he had been killed. He concluded that the burning resulted from some inherent cause in the individual and that perhaps the hot brick had touched something off. All in all, Dr. Masson could not put the facts together as they stood. The case was, as far as he could tell, to be cast as one of spontaneous combustion. The son and daughter-in-law were acquitted. Again, by Theodoric R. and John B. Beck, Elements of Medical Jurisprudence. On Christmas Eve 1885, near Ottawa, Illinois, Mr. and Mrs. Patrick Rooney, their son John, and their hired hand John Larson sat around the kitchen table celebrating the holiday with a jug of whiskey Farmer Rooney had just brought back from town. Larson had a few drinks and went off to bed. John Rooney stayed for a while, but eventually left for his farm a mile away. Larson, rising early, came down Christmas morning to do his chores. He tried to strike a match on the iron kitchen stove, but found to his surprise that the stove was covered with a layer of greasy soot. Alarmed, he quickly struck the match against his thumbnail and lit the lamp. To his horror, he saw Patrick Rooney sitting dead in a chair. There was no sign of Mrs. Rooney. Larson rushed out, saddled a horse and galloped madly to John Rooney's farm. When Larson and young Rooney got back, they found what remained of Mrs. Rooney under a 3-by-4-foot hole in the floor. On the bare ground, a couple of feet below, were a burned piece of skull, 2 charred vertebrae, a foot, and a small pile of ashes, all that remained of the 200-pound woman. No other part of the floor was burned, and neither was any of the furniture. The only damaged item was the corner of the tablecloth hanging over the hole, which was slightly scorched. The police were summoned. They found that the soot, drifting upstairs, had outlined Larson's head on the pillow while he slept. Although suspicion fell on Larson, no case could be made against him. The coroner, Dr. Floyd Clemens, pointed out to the bewildered jury that this was a classic instance of spontaneous combustion, a body consumed by intense heat and the absence of any kind of fire. The jury, however, could not reach a verdict on the cause of Mrs. Rooney's death other than calling it accidental. But the cause of her husband's death was quite clear. He had been asphyxiated by the fumes of his wife's burning body. Imagine that. I won't bother. I won't bother reading the references in the various books of that stories being reported in. An old soldier climbed up into a hayloft in Colchester, England, on Sunday, February 19, 1888, to sleep off his drunkenness. He was found completely consumed by fire, while the highly flammable hay around him, both loose and in bundles, was not even scorched. How is that possible, people of Earth? How? It was reported in the British Medical Journal on 21st of April 1888, just slightly over 2 months later. Dr. B. H. Hartwell, a New England doctor of medicine, reported that a child beckoned him for help on the road near Ayer, Massachusetts, on May 12, 1890. Standing in a clearing in a wood was the crouched form of a woman, the child's mother, with flames blazing from her shoulders, abdomen, and legs. Hartwell saw no evidence that she had set herself on fire and noticed that the ground was wet from a recent rainfall. So far as he could tell, she seemed to have just burst into flames without any apparent cause. The doctor was able to put the flames out by throwing earth onto the woman's badly burned body, again depriving the fire of any oxygen. We must remember that, people of Earth, in the event anyone around us should go up in flames or ourselves. Handy trick to know. From 1900 to 1950. Some odd things happened in Binbrook, Lincolnshire, England, around the end of 1904. In December, the Reverend A.C. Custance said that objects were being hurled about and sometimes catching fire at the rectory. A month later, a Binbrook farmer walked into his kitchen and saw the servant girl busy sweeping, oblivious of the flames leaping from the back of her dress. He shouted to her and rushed to smother the flames, but she was badly burned. A most peculiar fire took the lives of Mr. and Mrs. John Kiley, a retired couple, at Butlocks Heath, a village near Southampton, England. On the morning of February 26, 1905, neighbours heard a scratching sound issuing from the Kiley house, and on entering the house, they found the interior in flames. Mr. Kiley was lying on the floor, totally consumed by fire. His wife was in an easy chair in the same room, also badly charred but recognisable. The police investigators noted an overturned table and an oil lamp with its glass chimney smashed on the floor, but it was not clear how this lamp could have been the cause of such an intense fire. The easy chair on which Mrs. Kiley was found was not burned or even singed. The jury brought in a verdict of accidental death, but by what means we are unable to say. 2 constables found the burned corpse of a woman in the village of Manna near Dinapur, India, in 1907. The 2 men carried the corpse, still smouldering inside unscorched clothes, to the district magistrate's office. The Indian press said that the officers had seen no signs of fire in the room where the body was. Here's a photo of the Binbrook Rectory where small objects had burst into flames with no apparent cause. It's odd, isn't it? Must have been a hot spot. I know, that was wicked of me. God forgive me. I couldn't resist. It's a bit of a hot spot, it's a hot spot, it's a hot spot. Nothing can change that, it's a hot spot. Are you hot in Brisbane, Australia today? I'm in lovely air conditioning. But if I went outside, I'd probably burst into flames too. Dear goddess. I've got to go out later and buy something for dinner. I've got kind of dinner that I cooked, like yesterday. I cooked, pasta and my version of spaghetti bolognese, but I don't put pork in it. So really all it is ground mince cooked up with veggies. So I had mushrooms and these little tiny tomatoes my friend Margaret gave me, very unusual, very sweet yellow tomatoes. Quite delicious actually. Thank you, Margaret. And I had zucchini and carrots in it. I can't have onion and garlic anymore because of my gut, which is annoying. But anyway, it was very delicious. But I had a massive big bowl for lunch and then I had another massive big bowl for dinner. I've got 2 bowls frozen and I need something different to eat today. I don't like to eat the same meal 2 days in a row because my mother used to torture me that way if I wouldn't eat my dinner. She'd keep presenting it to me sometimes for days. And so to this day I refuse to eat the same meal unless it's all there is to eat and I'm dastardly poor that week. But if I can, I like variety in my diet. Different kind of meal every day. Let us continue. 2 retired school teachers, Margaret and Wilhelmina Dewar of Whitley Bay near Blyth, England, were involved in a sensational accident case reported in the British press in 1908. On the evening of March 22, Margaret Dewar ran to her neighbour's house in great distress and told them that she had found her sister burned to death. When the neighbours entered the Dewar house, they found the charred body of Wilhelmina lying on a bed. The sheets and bed showed no sign of fire, nor for that matter did any part of the house. At the inquest, Margaret repeatedly testified that she had discovered her sister's body on the bed exactly as observed by the neighbours. The coroner refused to believe such a preposterous story. How could a body burn up on an unscorched bed? He accused Margaret of lying, threatened her with prosecution for perjury, and postponed the inquest to a later date. Poor Margaret was placed under a tremendous amount of local pressure from both her neighbours and the newspapers. No one would believe her tale. When the inquest resumed, she admitted to lying. She said that what had actually happened was that she had found Wilhelmina on fire, but still alive, on the ground floor of their house, that she had put out the flames and had helped her sister upstairs, and that there she had put Wilhelmina on the bed, where she died. Somehow, this story satisfied the coroner more than Margaret's original testimony, although there had been no signs of fire downstairs either. After pronouncing a verdict of accidental death by fire, the coroner noted that the case was one of the most extraordinary he had ever investigated. A curious case of spontaneous combustion was reported from Antigua in the British West Indies in August 1929. The woman involved was luckier than most victims of such fires. Her clothing would ignite without any apparent cause, but she was always unharmed. Her bedding, too, was unaffected. The sheets above and below her were frequently scorched when she woke up. Her story was corroborated by the neighbours, who had helped replace her burned-up wardrobe. Dear Goddess. On a cold January morning in 1932 in Bladenboro, North Carolina, the cotton dress of Mrs. Charles Williamson, she didn't deserve to have her own name, don't you understand? Well, they did that in the old days. It's rude. Steal a woman's identity right from under her. Suddenly flared into flames. I could flare into flames over that alone. By the gods. She was not standing near any kind of fire, and her dress had not been in contact with cleaning fluid or any other flammable substance. Her husband and daughter tore off the flaming dress with their bare hands. Remarkably, not one of the three was even slightly burned. Soon after this, a pair of Mr. Williamson's pants, hanging in a closet, burst into flames. Then a bed caught fire, as did the curtains in an unoccupied room. Various articles in the house were found burning with bluish jet-like flames, but oddly enough, adjacent objects were never affected. There was no smoke or smell associated with the flames, which could not be extinguished. Pardon me. They just vanished after the attacked object was totally consumed. It's odd, isn't it? I find that a bit odd. The authorities were called in, but the arson experts, police and special investigators from the gas and electric companies were at a total loss to explain the erratic fires. On the fifth day, the fires suddenly stopped. A newspaper report stated, "The fires started, burned out and vanished as mysteriously as if guided by invisible hands. There has been no logical explanation." It's annoying when it happens. We all want a logical explanation. We all do. I know I do. The sudden combustion of Mrs. Mary Carpenter, who perished while vacationing on a cabin cruiser off Norfolk, England on July 29, 1938, took place in full view of her husband and children. Oh, that's awful. That's really fucking awful. Imagine that. She was engulfed in flames and reduced to a charred corpse in minutes. Minutes, people of Earth. Mere minutes. No one else was burned and the boat was undamaged. I suppose her clothes caught fire, the investigating officer said, but I can't understand how it happened. It's just dreadful. It's just dreadful. Phyllis Newcomb burst into flames. At least she got her own name though. Burst into flames in the middle of a dance floor on the evening of August 27, 1938, at the Chelmsford Shire Hall in Chelmsford, England. The 22-year-old girl was wearing a dress modelled on an old-fashioned crinoline. At midnight, just as she was leaving the dance floor, her dress flared up and within seconds she was a blazing mass of blue flames. The young woman's fiancé, Henry McCausland, tried valiantly to beat out the flames with his bare hands, but it was already too late. Phyllis was fatally burned before the ambulance arrived. 1938. At the inquest, the coroner initially surmised that a light from a cigarette must have set the gown on fire, but the young woman's father was able to demonstrate to the court that the dress was not that flammable. Using a piece of the same material, he showed that only an open flame would set the cloth on fire, and that a cigarette by itself would not ignite it. Since all the witnesses swore that no one had used a lighter or struck a match at midnight in the Shire Hall, the case remained unsolved. Oh, that's just dreadful. And why, of all the weirdest of all times, at midnight? And why, just as she was leaving? One of the youngest victims of unexplained death by fire, 11-month-old Peter Seaton of London, oh, poor baby, had been put to bed as usual one evening in January 1939. Soon after, a visitor, Harold Huckstep, heard screams of terror. Rushing upstairs to Peter's room, Mr. Huckstep opened the door to face an inferno of leaping flames that flung him back across the hall. There was no way he could rescue the baby. After the firemen had put out the blaze, a thorough investigation of the nursery revealed nothing that could have caused such a conflagration. What was especially remarkable was that, despite the intensity of the fire, hardly any of the furniture was damaged. The burnt body of Alan M. Small, aged 52, was found in his home at Deer Isle, Maine, on January 13, 1945. The carpet beneath the body was scorched, but there was no other sign of fire anywhere in the house. In the kitchen, the stove lids were all in place, and Small's unlit pipe was resting on a shelf. On December 15, 1949, the police reported a 53-year-old woman, Mrs. Ellen K. Coutres, C-O-U-T-R-E-S, Coutre, dead from burns in her home in Manchester, New Hampshire. New Hampshire. I know. Her horribly disfigured body was discovered lying on the floor in an unscorched room. The fireplace had not been used, and no other source of fire could be found. The Associated Press release stated there was no other sign of fire, and although the woman must have been a human torch, flames had not ignited the wooden structure of the frame house. Since 1950, the 1951 death of Mrs. Mary Reeser of St. Petersburg, Florida, who was found reduced to ashes in a practically undamaged apartment, was a landmark case of spontaneous combustion because it was the first instance where every possible tool of modern scientific investigation was used to determine the cause of this mysterious phenomenon. Yet, despite the efforts of the FBI, fire officials, arson experts, and pathologists, a year after the incident, Detective Cass Burgess of the St. Petersburg Police commented as follows: "Our investigation has turned up nothing that could be singled out as proving beyond a doubt what actually happened. The case is still open. We are still as far from establishing any logical cause for the death as we were when we first entered Mrs. Reese's apartment." To which Police Chief J.R. Reichert added, "As far as logical explanations go, this is one of those things that just couldn't have happened. But it did. The case is not closed and may never be to the satisfaction of all concerned." And Dr. Wilton M. Krogman, a physical anthropologist at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine and a world-renowned expert on the effects of fire on the human body, finally gave up trying to understand what had happened. Dr. Krogman said, "I regard it as the most amazing thing I've ever seen. As I review it, the short hairs on my neck bristle with vague fear. Were I living in the Middle Ages, I'd mutter something about black magic." Here are the details of the case. Mrs. Mary Hardy Reeser. I've got to go. I'll be back. One moment. I've got to take my antibiotic. I'll be back. I won't be long. Sorry about that, people of Earth. It's because it's the last one, but you can't eat 2 hours before and you can't eat 1 hour after. It's all very hard to negotiate, and I think I've stuffed up quite a few bloody antibiotics during this process. So it's the last one, and I was determined to get it right. I was supposed to take it at 2 and I got distracted with reading. So anyway, it's all good now. It's the last one. I'm free of them at last. Hopefully I'm better now. It's going to probably take it a while to flush it out of my system for the next few days too. So there is that. Anyway, where were we? We're all good. I've completed that task. Here are the details of the case. Mrs. Mary Hardy Reeser, an agreeable, motherly widow of 67, was living in St. Petersburg, Florida, to be near to her son, Dr. Richard Reeser. On the evening of July 1, 1951, she had remained in her son's home with one of her grandchildren, while the rest of the family went to the beach. When they returned, they found Mrs. Reeser had already left for her own apartment. The younger Mrs. Reeser drove to her mother-in-law's to see if everything was all right. According to her testimony, there was nothing in Mrs. Mary Reeser's appearance or demeanour to cause any alarm. Dr. Reeser visited his mother later that evening. She was mildly depressed over the fact that she had not heard from 2 friends who were supposed to rent an apartment for her in anticipation of a return trip to Columbia, Pennsylvania, formerly her hometown. His mother told him that she wished to retire early and would take 2 sleeping pills to ensure a good night's rest. Dr. Reeser left at about 8:30 p.m. and returned to his house. The last person to see Mrs. Reeser alive was her landlady, Mrs. Pansy M. Carpenter, who lived in another apartment in the 4-unit building. The 2 units between them were unoccupied. Mrs. Carpenter saw Mrs. Reeser briefly at about 9 p.m. She was wearing her nightgown, a house coat, and black satin slippers, and was lounging in a comfortable chair, smoking a cigarette. The bed covers had been turned back. Mrs. Reeser's last night was a typical summer night in Florida. The sky was overcast with occasional flashes of heat lightning in the distance. When Mrs. Carpenter woke up Monday morning at 5 a.m, she noticed a slight odour of smoke, but was not alarmed, since she attributed the smell to a water pump in the garage that had been overheating lately. She got up, turned off the pump, and settled back into bed. When she got up an hour later to collect her newspaper outside, she no longer smelled any smoke. At 8 a.m, a telegram arrived for Mrs. Reeser. Mrs. Carpenter signed the receipt and went to her tenant's apartment to bring her the telegram. The doorknob, when she placed her hand on it, was hot. Alarmed, she stepped back and shouted for help. 2 painters working across the street ran over. One of them opened the door. As he entered, he felt a blast of hot air. Thinking of rescuing Mrs. Reeser, he frantically looked around, but saw no signs of her. The bed was empty. There was some smoke, but the only fire was a small flame on a wooden beam over a partition separating the living room and kitchenette. The firemen arrived, put out the small flame with a hand pump, and tore away part of the partition. When Assistant Fire Chief S.O. Griffith began his inspection of the premises, he could not believe his eyes. In the middle of the floor, there was a charred area roughly 4 feet in diameter, inside which he found a number of blackened chair springs and the ghastly remains of a human body consisting of a charred liver attached to a piece of the spine, a shrunken skull, 1 foot still wearing a black satin slipper, and a small pile of ashes. It's just bizarre. It's just bizarre. Coroner Edward T. Silk arrived to examine the body and survey the apartment. Although deeply puzzled, he decided that the death was accidental and authorised, it goes over this page, the removal of the remains. The scooped up ashes, the tiny shrunken head, and the slipper-encased foot were taken by ambulance to a local hospital. The ensuing investigation included police and fire officials, as well as arson experts. The facts that confronted them seemed inexplicable considering the great heat necessary to account for Mrs. Reese's incinerated body. Little of the furniture, other than the chair and the end table next to it, was badly damaged, but the apartment had suffered some peculiar effects. The ceiling, draperies and walls, from a point exactly 4 feet above the floor, were coated with smelly, oily soot. Below this 4-foot mark there was none. The wall paint adjacent to the chair was faintly browned, but the carpet where the chair had rested was not even burned through. A wall mirror 10 feet away had cracked, probably from heat. On a dressing table 12 feet away, 2 pink wax candles had puddled, but their wicks lay undamaged in their holders. How can that be? Wicks are kind of made of cotton too, which would burn quite easily. It's odd. Plastic wall outlets above the 4-foot mark were melted, but the fuses were not blown and the current was on. The baseboard electrical outlets were undamaged. An electric clock plugged into one of the fused fixtures had stopped at precisely 4:20. All the stoners will giggle at that. It's not funny, people, that. But the same clock ran perfectly when plugged into one of the baseboard outlets. Well, how can that be? How can that be? Newspapers nearby on a table and draperies and linens on the daybed close at hand, all flammable, were not damaged. And though the painters and Mrs. Carpenter had felt a wave of heat when they opened the door, no one had noted smoke or burning odour, and there were no embers or flames in the ashes. Faced with such a mystery, the St. Petersburg authorities called in the FBI. Laboratory findings showed that Mrs. Reese's estimated weight of 175 pounds had been reduced to a total of less than 10 pounds, including the foot and shrunken head. The final report concluded that no known chemical agents or other accelerants had been involved in starting the fire, and ended by stating that the case was unusual and improbable. Tell that to the dead woman. The top arson specialist of the National Board of Underwriters was also stumped. I can only say, he admitted, the victim died from fire. Finally, the aforementioned Dr. Croman, an authority on different kinds of burns, was asked to help clarify the mystery. After checking the findings of the other authorities, he began eliminating possibilities. He considered lightning as a cause, but an engineer who specialised in the effects of lightning bolts on the human body flatly dismissed such a conjecture. Besides, lightning was not reported in the immediate neighbourhood during the night of the accident. Another possibility was that the sedatives taken by Mrs. Reeser had made her so drowsy that she did not notice a fire set to her nightgown or chair by the cigarette she was smoking. However, neither the gown nor the chair was particularly flammable, and besides, there was not enough material available in these items to produce the intense heat necessary to reduce a human body to ashes. Dr. Croman has burned cadavers with gasoline, oil, wood, and all other kinds of agents. He has experimented with bones encased in flesh or stripped, both moist and dry. His tests have utilised combustion apparatus ranging from outdoor pyres to the most modern pressurised crematorium equipment. He has demonstrated conclusively that it takes enormous heat to consume a body, and that only at over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit would bone become volatile enough to lose its shape and leave only ashes. These are very great heats, he said, that would sear, char, scorch, or otherwise mar or affect anything and everything within a considerable radius. They say truth often is stranger than fiction, and this case proves it. The remaining slippered left foot was a mystery in itself. Coming up, I finished those fucking antibiotics. Coming up with a cold sore instead. I can't win, people of it. I swear to all the gods, I can't win. Anyway. Just bing bam boom, out of the blue. I'll put some honey on it, try and knock it down. The remaining slippered left foot was a mystery in itself. It was established that Mrs. Reeser was in the habit of stretching out her left leg because of some physical discomfort in that limb. The foot was left unburned, apparently because it was outside the mysterious 4-foot radius of incineration. Another speculation, that the fire might have been caused by some failure in the electrical system, was also ruled out by the experts. The fuse would have blown. Finally, murder and suicide were considered. Murder was eliminated because there were no known suspects. The apartment had not been disturbed, and there was no hypothesis to account for how such a murder could have been accomplished. Suicide too was ruled out. Mrs. Reeser was well provided for and not depressed. And again, how could she have set such a fire? Eventually, Dr. Croman admitted defeat. He reported to Chief Reichardt, "I have posed the problem to myself again and again of why Mrs. Reeser could have been so thoroughly destroyed, even to the bones, and yet leave nearby objects materially unaffected. I always end up rejecting it in theory, but facing it in apparent fact." Nor could he understand the shrunken condition of Mrs. Reese's skull. The head is not left complete in ordinary burning cases. Certainly it does not shrivel or symmetrically reduce to a much smaller size. In presence of heat sufficient to destroy soft tissues, the skull would literally explode in many pieces. I have never known any exception to this rule. Never have I seen a skull so shrunken or a body so completely consumed by heat. A particularly bizarre case of death by burning was that of 46-year-old Glenn B. Denny, owner of a foundry and a resident of Algiers, Louisiana. On September 18, 1952, a neighbour called the fire department when she noticed smoke coming from the apartment above her. When the firemen forced open the door, they found the burning body of a man in the living room. The flames were quickly put out with a blanket. Lieutenant Louis Wattigny recounted, "The man was lying on the floor behind the door and he was a mass of flames. Not another blessed thing in the room was burning. He was dead. I don't know what caused the fire to burn so hot. He could have been saturated with some oil. I did not smell anything, however. In all my experience, I never saw anything to beat this." There was no evidence that Mr. Denny was a smoker and no matches were found. The windows were all closed. There were no traces of flammable liquids anywhere. But the most startling discovery was that Denny had cut his wrists before he collapsed in flames. Both wrist arteries were severed, and there was a pool of blood and a bloody knife in the kitchen. It was determined that Denny had been depressed and drinking heavily. He had had the shakes when last seen alive. The final verdict stated that Denny had cut his wrists and then set fire to himself to make sure. Both the evidence and logic, however, strongly contradicted such a finding. How could a man rapidly losing blood from 5 deep cuts walk from the kitchen to the living room, drench himself with kerosene that was never detected from a can that was never found, and then set himself on fire with a non-existent match? The body of Wayman Wood of Greenville, South Carolina, was found crisped black in the front seat of his closed car on March 1, 1953. The car was parked on the side of bypass Route 291. Although little remained of Wood, the car, which contained a half tank of gas, was unaffected except for the windshield, which had bubbled and sagged inward from the intense heat. In December 1956, I'm freaking out because that came up and now I've got pain in my lymph nodes under each armpit. Psychosomatic, isn't it, from reading all these horror stories? I'm sure it's psychosomatic. Go away, illnesses. Don't need to take on other people's illnesses or negativity. Just saying. Certainly don't want to sit here and spontaneously combust in front of you all. That would be weird. How would we explain that? Somebody would say, got rid of the bitch at long last. I'm not that easy to get rid of people. 3 people tried to kill me in my 30s and 40s already. Still kicking on. My flames are the bush that cannot be consumed by fire. Probably did that as an unconscious protective device too, if the truth be known. I hate the thought of spontaneously combusting. Awful. In December 1956, a 78-year-old cripple, young Sikh Kim of 1130 Mauna Kea Street, Honolulu, was found enveloped in blue flames by his next-door neighbour. The heat was too intense for her even to approach him. By the time the firemen got there, 15 minutes later, the victim and his overstuffed chair were reduced to ashes. His feet, however, remained undamaged and were still propped up on his wheelchair, facing the chair in which he had been sitting. Nothing else in the room, even the curtains and clothing nearby, had suffered any damage. Appalling, isn't it? Just appalling. Children are rarely mentioned as victims of spontaneous combustion, but Ricky P. Pruitt of Rockford, Illinois, may have been one of the few unfortunate exceptions. The 4-month-old infant died of severe burns in the spring of 1959, but there were no clues as to what had caused them. His garments showed no scorch marks, nor did the bedding of the crib in which he was found. Poor baby. What an awful thing to happen to someone. It's just beyond awful. On an October evening in the late 1950s, 19-year-old Maybelle Andrews was dancing with her boyfriend, Billy Clifford, in a London discotheque. Suddenly, she burst into flames. The fire blazed from her back and chest, enveloping her head and igniting her hair. Her boyfriend and some of the bystanders tried to beat out the flames, but they could not save her. She died on the way to the hospital. According to Clifford's testimony, I saw no one smoking on the dance floor. There were no candles on the tables, and I did not see her dress catch fire from anything. I know it sounds incredible, but it appeared to me that the flames burst outwards as if they originated within her body. Other witnesses agreed. The final verdict was death by misadventure caused by a fire of unknown origin. Bless. Billy Peterson, about 30 years old, an automobile factory worker from Pontiac, Michigan, had been very depressed over the state of his health for several months. On December 13, 1959, at 7:45 p.m, he was found dead in his car, an apparent suicide. When he was discovered, the right front seat of the car was smouldering where the exhaust pipe had been bent to lead into the closed car. Peterson's body was seated several feet away from the smouldering upholstery. His body was taken to the Pontiac General Hospital, where he was pronounced dead of carbon monoxide poisoning, a finding consistent with the idea of suicide. But what could not be explained were the third-degree burns on Billy's back, legs and arms, and the seared condition of his nose, throat and lungs. What was even more startling was that Peterson's clothing, even his underwear, was in no way damaged, and that unsinged hairs stuck up through the charred flesh. How could that be? How could your hair not go on fire with the rest of you? The investigators first suggested heated exhaust fumes, and one detective proposed the idea of a torture killing, but neither explanation could account for Billy's condition. A former actress, Mrs. Olga Worth Stevens, aged 75, of Dallas, Texas, was sitting in a parked car in October 1964 when witnesses saw her burst into flames. She was fatally burned before anyone could come to her rescue. Firemen said that the automobile was not damaged and contained nothing that could have started the fire. In the small town of Coudersport, Pennsylvania, Don E. Gosnell, a meter reader for the North Penn Gas Company, set out on his accustomed rounds on the morning of December 5, 1966. His first call was on Dr. John Irving Bentley, a 92-year-old retired physician who was a semi-invalid but still able to get around his house with the aid of a walker. Gosnell opened the doctor's front door, yelled, but received no answer. He proceeded downstairs to the basement to read the meter. There he became aware of a light blue smoke of unusual odour, like that of starting up a new central heating system, somewhat sweet. In the corner of the dirt-floored basement was a pile of fine ash about 14 inches in diameter and about 5 inches high, perhaps enough to fill a bucket. Idly he kicked and scattered the stuff. He did not notice the hole in the ceiling, an irregular area about 2.5 feet wide and 4 feet long, charred around the edges, burned clear through the floorboards above. He read the meter and then went upstairs to look in on the doctor. There the smoke was denser, but Dr. Bentley was nowhere in sight. Don Gosnell stuck his head into the bathroom. He was appalled at the sight that greeted him. The doctor's walker was tilted over the burned hole in the floor, and alongside it was all that remained of Dr. Bentley, his right leg from the knee down, round but not charred. The shoe was still intact. Gosnell ran out of the house, white as a sheet, yelling at the top of his lungs, "Dr. Bentley burnt up." The coroner, John Dick, had too many unanswered questions to determine how the accident could have happened. One theory was that the doctor had set his robe on fire in the living room while striking a match to light his pipe, then used his walker to get to the bathroom for water to put out the flames. His robe was found in the bathtub next to the drain, singed but not badly burned. But even if the robe had burst into flames, how could it have generated enough heat to set a body on fire? If the fire had started in the living room, why was there no trace of it? And how was it possible for a body to be consumed so completely, with so little else being affected? The coroner's certificate finally gave asphyxiation and 90% burning as the cause of Dr. Bentley's basically inexplicable death. I keep getting this Melbourne number. They call me almost every day, and then when I answer it, they hang up. Pain in my ass they are. Just going to ignore it. Yeah, already gone, see? It's a scammer. Two cases of infant spontaneous combustion were reported in England in 1973 and 1974. In 1973, 7-month-old Parvinder Kaur and the baby carriage in which the child was sitting suddenly burst into flames in the family living room. The infant was treated at the burns unit at the Birmingham Hospital, Birmingham, England. Officials were unable to determine any cause for the fire. The following year, the Birmingham, England Evening Mail of August 26, 1974, reported the death of 6-month-old Lisa Tipton. She was found burned to death in an unexplained fire confined to one room of her parents' home in Highfields, Staffordshire. Not just one but 6 people were involved in what appears to be an instance of multiple victims of spontaneous combustion. The following account is from the Nigerian Herald of December 27, 1976. The death of 6 members of a family of 7 by fire in Lagos has now become the greatest mystery. An on-the-spot investigation yesterday revealed that everything in a small wooden room at Iponri on the Lagos mainland remained intact. Among the articles left untouched by fire were 2 cotton mattresses carefully placed on 2 iron beds. Altogether, the room looked unaffected by the fire, which killed the 6 persons. It was also expected, from the condition of the fire victims, that nothing, including the wooden walls and iron sheets on the roof, would have remained. And although earlier reports claimed that the fire came from petrol, which was sprinkled on the family through an opening in the wooden wall where they were asleep, this was claimed by the mother who survived. It became known yesterday that this might not be true at all. Right, we'll go back. We've only got just over 30 minutes before my video expires at the 3-hour mark. They've included a a piece here on possible explanations for spontaneous combustion. Spontaneous human combustion is not a phenomenon recognised by 20th century science. It is not listed in the International Classification of Diseases compiled by the World Health Organization, nor is it a subject heading in the Index Medicus, the National Library of Medicine's Index of Biomedical Literature. Despite the evidence of police and fire authorities, arson specialists, coroners and pathologists, most doctors and scientists regard seemingly indisputable cases as simply not thoroughly investigated. However, such scepticism was not always prevalent. In the 17th and 18th centuries, spontaneous combustion, especially of drunkards, was regarded as divine retribution. But by the 19th century, advances in biology and chemistry encouraged researchers to look for more mundane causes for these seemingly inexplicable fires. A number of additional possibilities were suggested that might, alone in various combinations, account for such bizarre occurrences. Intestinal gases are flammable. Cadavers produce gases that are flammable. Haystacks and compost heaps can build up enough heat for spontaneous combustion. Certain elements and compounds spontaneously burst into flames when exposed to air. This is true of phosphorus, for example, which is a constituent of the human body. Some chemicals that are inert alone combine to form explosive compounds. The luminescence emitted by certain insects and fishes proves the possibility of internal fire of some kind. Fats and oils, which the human body contains in abundance, are excellent fuels. Static electricity produces sparks that could, under certain conditions, set a body on fire. Mounting evidence indicated, however, that none of these hypotheses could really account for spontaneous human combustion. In 1851, a German chemist pointed out that overweight imbibers of brandy generally do not burn when they are close to a fire. Towards the end of the 1800s, several doctors said it was difficult to comprehend how the body, which has a high water content and relatively little fat, could combust. Finally, the April 22nd, 1905 issue of American Medicine dealt a harsh blow to SHC believers, noting, of the total number of cases published, nearly half have been reported from the neurotic land of France. Must be all that wine and cheese. The combustion, not the neurosis, you understand. To test the theory that alcohol renders the body highly combustible, a rat was soaked in alcohol for a year, then set on fire. The skin blazed up fiercely, charring some outer layers of flesh, but the rat's internal organs and tissues were hardly affected. The experiment was repeated on museum specimens that had been immersed in alcohol for even longer periods. The results, however, were the same. Pardon me. It may be... Oh, now I need to sneeze. First the burp, then the sneeze. Oh, dear God. It may be possible for flammable gases produced by digestion to accumulate in the body and present a hazard. An English pastor with such a condition was once warned not to blow out the altar candles following church services for fear his breath might be ignited. Must have had very foul breath, if you ask me. By the gods. Static electricity seems a good candidate for starting these fires, no matter what might fuel them thereafter. I used to freak out about that when I was young because I always had a lot of static electricity. You could turn the light off and watch all the sparks flying off myself and my clothing. Anyway, here I am, nearly 60. It's another thing I didn't die of, people of Earth. Astonishingly. But not really, because the odds are fairly small, but still something to think about. Static electricity seems a good candidate for starting these fires, no matter what might fuel them thereafter. The human body can, according to the Fire Protection Manual of the National Fire Protection Association, accumulate a static charge of several thousand volts. Some people have been known to build up far greater charges, occasionally generating up to 30,000 volts. Ordinarily, this electricity is harmlessly discharged through the hair, but in certain volatile situations, such as factories for combustible materials or hospital operating rooms using gaseous anaesthetics, these people can spark off explosions. That's a worry. But these explosions have never been known to burn one person to ashes, leaving the room and furnishings undamaged. A number of other physical causes for spontaneous combustion have been suggested, including fireballs, lightning, internal atomic explosions, laser beams, microwave radiation, high-frequency sound, and geomagnetic flux. But the mechanisms through which any of these might work are unexplained. And for now, so is human combustion. There's another article within an article. We've got 30 minutes. We might just squeeze this one in too. When truth is as strange as fiction. Spontaneous human combustion was such a well-known phenomenon during the 18th and 19th centuries that a number of authors used it to dispose of some of their fictional characters. In Charles Dickens's Bleak House, published in the mid-1800s, Crook, an old cadaverous, gin-soaked rag and bottle merchant, dies gruesomely of spontaneous combustion. Crook was a symbol for all the social evils and inequities then rampant in England, and through his horrible death, Dickens prophesied the self-destruction of all authorities in all places under all names soever, where false pretences are made and where injustice is done. The chapter depicting Crook's demise concluded, "Call the death by any name you will, attribute it to whom you will, or say it might have been prevented how you will, it is the same death eternally, inborn, inbred, engendered in the corrupted humours of the vicious body itself, and that only, spontaneous combustion, and none other of all the deaths that can be died." When this instalment of the serialised Bleak House appeared, the literary critic George Henry Lewes severely chided his old friend Dickens for perpetuating what he felt to be a vulgar and unscientific superstition. But Dickens vigorously defended the reality of spontaneous combustion, citing many documented cases, including those of Madame Millet of Rheims and of the Countess de Bondy, as well as his own memories of inquests he attended when he was still a young reporter. Later, when Bleak House was reissued in a single volume, Dickens continued to defend the authenticity of spontaneous human combustion in his foreword. I shall not abandon the facts until there shall have been a considerable spontaneous combustion of the testimony on which human occurrences are usually received. The earliest literary account of spontaneous combustion is from the 1798 novel Wieland, written by America's first novelist and master of the Gothic, Charles Brockden Brown. The main character is a German pietist who observes the mysterious solitary rites of his religion in a tumble-down wooden shack he calls his chapel. One night, his wife is startled by a bright light that bursts above the chapel and by a loud report like the explosion of a mine. She hears horrible shrieks, but by the time she gets to the shack, the light and cries have died away. She calls Wieland insensible, so she finds Wieland insensible, his clothing in cinders, his body frightfully burned, but the chapel unharmed. The wretched man dies after terrible suffering. The disease betrayed more terrible symptoms. Fever and delirium terminated in lethargic slumber. Yet not until insupportable exhalations and crawling putrefaction had driven from his chamber and the house everyone whom their duty did not detain. The reader will recognise this as a Gothic version of the priest Bertoli's case reported on page 82. In Frederick Marryat's 1834 novel Jacob Faithful, the hero's mother is a victim of spontaneous combustion. In his account, Marryat closely followed the details of an 1832 case reported in London. Jacob enters his parents' cabin aboard a barge on the Thames. The lamp fixed against the after bulkhead with a glass before it was still alight, and I could see plainly to every corner of the cabin. Nothing was burning, not even the curtains. To my mother's bed appeared to be singed. There appeared to be a black mass in the middle of the bed. I put my hand fearfully upon it. It was a sort of unctuous, pitchy cinder. I screamed with horror. I staggered from the cabin and fell down on the deck in a state amounting to almost insanity. She perished from what is called spontaneous combustion and inflammation of the gases generated from the spirits absorbed into the system. In Gogol's Dead Souls 1842, there is a regretful mention of the death of a blacksmith combined with relief that the smithy itself had not burned. He caught fire himself. Something inside him caught fire, must have had too much to drink. Only a blue flame came out of him, and he smouldered, and turned as black as coal. And he was such a clever blacksmith. Nikolai Gogol is famous for his social commentary in which he ridiculed Russian society and officials. Dead Souls, one of his greatest works, contains an episode in which a man catches on fire. Gogol hypothesized that the flames, presumably induced by alcohol, were the just reward of drunkenness. Doesn't explain the babies who didn't drink though, and the other people that weren't drunks. So there was that. Herman Melville too used the device. In Redburn, 1849, Miguel, a Shanghai sailor, is found on deck in a stupor, drunk and stinking. As the rest of the horrified crew look on, 2 threads of greenish fire like a forked tongue darted out between the lips, and in a moment the cadaverous fire was covered by a swarm of worm-like flames. The uncovered body burned before us precisely like a phosphorescent shark in a midnight sea. Herman Melville's Redburn is based upon his first experience at sea as a cabin boy in a merchant vessel bound for Liverpool. Could it be that he had witnessed an incident of spontaneous combustion? And Thomas de Quincey, in the 1856 revised edition of Confessions of an English Opium Eater, included as one of the pains of opium the fear that the narcotic, like alcohol, might result in spontaneous combustion, and that he might himself take leave of the literary world in that fashion. The mysterious fiery death was also used by Mark Twain in his Life on the Mississippi, 1883. Jimmy Finn was not burned in the calaboose, but died a natural death in a tan vat of a combination of delirium tremens, otherwise known as the shakes, and spontaneous combustion, otherwise known as the burns. When I say natural death, it was a natural death for Jimmy Finn to die. My dark humour suited there, you understand. I know. Finally, in Émile Zola's 1893 novel, Le Docteur Pascal, one of the members of the degenerate McQuart family catches fire from the smouldering tobacco of his pipe while he sits in a drunken stupor as his sister watches with horror. At first, Félicité thought it was his linen, his underpants, or his vest which was burning, but there was no doubt about it. It was his flesh, burning with a flickering blue flame, light dancing like a flame spreading over the surface of a bowl of alcohol. It was growing, spreading rapidly, and the skin was splitting and the fat beginning to melt. Now the liquid fat was dribbling through the cracks in his skin, feeding the flame which was spreading to his belly. And Félicité realized that he was burning up like a sponge soaked in alcohol. Émile Zola, leader of French literature's naturalist school, emphasized in many of his works the influence of heredity on the individual. In Le Docteur Pascal, one of 20 novels in his famous series, Les Rougon McCourt, he graphically portrayed the death of Antoine McCourt, who burst into flames while in a drunken sleep. Thus concludes today's reading of Unearthly Fates from Mysteries of the Unexplained, an entire chapter on spontaneous combustion. I didn't even mix it up. I found it so riveting. I worked my way through it, including a mild panic attack halfway through. We've done well, people of Earth, but lest I too become a blazing, towering inferno of loveliness, I'm going to exit stage left and go and find something yummy to eat. I've got 2 remaining apricot chocolates gifted me by my beautiful Margaret. To you, Margaret. The last 2, I tried to stretch them out as long as possible, on average 1 a day, but sometimes I had a few more than 1 a day. And I also need to duck down to the shop so I can get something for my dinner. And so I bid you all adieu. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, night, evening, afternoon. And remember, after hearing all these grisly stories, to stay cool till after school and never let the bastards burn you down. Well, enough already, enough. But anyway, take good care, be of good cheer. If you've listened to this entire 3 hours of spontaneous combustion, I suggest, like myself, you go and do something frivolous and childlike and life-affirming. And to you all.